Air. Alright, we're live. Hi everybody, welcome to the 6th edition of the Levitum Knot. And we're resuming from where we left off last week. Aditya is going to continue talking about Myers Briggs. And Aditya, maybe you can do a quick recap and then we can go from there.
Sure. Hey, hi all. So we're going to continue our talk and discussion about Myers Briggs and personality type. So last week we covered sort of a little more detail from the general idea behind the Myers-Briggs type indicators and the functions or factors on which they are measured. So just this slide that you see in front of you is a recap of the four main axes, if you want to call them that, or type dichotomies on which we measure type. So one-line description for each here is extroversion versus introversion is about energy. How do you focus your energy? How do you gain or lose your energy? Where that sort of determines your extroversion or introversion level. Sensing, intuition. This is how do you take in information from the outside world? What do you do with it? As in how do you take it in sort of very in the present form of using a five senses, or in a more sort of pattern sensing way? What do you do with the information you collect? Is it sort of, what kind of decisions do you make? That's sort of thinking, feeling. And the last one is judging, perceiving, which is about how do you deal with the outside world in terms of your lifestyle. So this is how the MBTI or the Myers-Briggs test looks at it. To go back a little bit into history, Myers-Briggs test was developed by a group of ladies in the 30s based on the theories of Carl Jung. And the theories were a little sort of broader and didn't lend themselves as easily to a quick questionnaire which allowed you to type yourself into a broad categorization to help with organizational. So the need was for the army. And so they developed sort of based on those theories, this set of questions that could help sort of identify for you what your personality type was, and then help the army decide, what best training they could give you, or what kind of deployment, for example. So I think it's important that we spend a little bit of time just thinking, going back to the original theories, because those theories are the ones that continue to hold favor among psychologists even today, and have basis in scientific thought as well. Whereas the Myers-Briggs test is more empirical and sort of just cataloging over the years how people respond to these things. So I'll quickly jump ahead to this here. So what is my type, right? Generally, the questionnaires we answer online or by a written test are what is called a reported type. There's also a method where you can self-estimate a type. Both of these are sort of a first-order approximation. From this, you can derive what is called a best fit or a verified type. You work with somebody who sort of understood the theories and the systems a little more deeply, and they help you identify where you may or may not have a good fit and find a better fit. And then you can evolve that through your own experiences, etc., and understand what is your true type. Now, obviously, there's no such thing as 100% sure about these things, but to a good high degree of confidence. Two statistics at the bottom that I've got there is 2/3 of any group that takes the test will report some sort of an agreement with the profile that they get at the end of the questionnaire. And 50% or more people will differ at least on one preference in their test. So for example, if somebody tests as an INTJ, they might be off on the, say, the T or the F, or maybe the J or the P. Invariably, it's the J or the P that people are mistyped on. So going ahead, by sort of what the practitioners of this do is they have an understanding of the Jungian theory behind it, and I will spend a few minutes just going through this. and describing it so that it helps us as well, because it'll help us understand how this works. So if you forget all the other parts of the MBTI and just focus on two pieces, the NS versus the TF, the axes, it's about how we take in information and what we do with that information. So, taking information that is perception is based on either sensing or intuition. Sensing is about noticing the practical element all around you. Sort of, if you're looking at a painting, a S might be more inclined to observing the details of the painting, which is the brush stroke and the variety of the elements in the scenery that might be there, for example. Whereas an sort of person leading with intuition might see more of the larger patterns or the context, or might even try and derive some meaning of that painting, and may even sort of not notice the actual elements that are in, so the details of the elements. Judging, what they call judging here, is actually about that information that's coming in. What are you doing with that information? Are you making any sort of decisions? Are you making some sort of calls, or forming any opinions about it? And that's thinking when feeling. That's the two judging functions. And in both, in Jungian theory, both thinking and feeling are considered rational functions, which have different weightages and give different importance to certain kinds of thought processes. So thinking values facts, logic, principle when evaluating information and making a decision, over whereas feeling values people-oriented judgments and value judgments. So, for example, a value judgment might be a certain value that you hold here would trump other considerations, or if some piece of information has implications for other people that you're involved with, then that sort of is the first opinion that is formed about that information that's coming in. So, going from this, each of our information input, that is perceiving and judging function, can be focused outwardly or inwardly. What this means is, when you pull in information, are you generally forming patterns based on your inner thought processes, or are you just sort of looking at the outside world and forming patterns about the outside world? This is a bit of a complicated notion, so I won't spend too much time on it. Just skipping ahead. So what this does is it breaks down into actually 8 cognitive processes, and these are sort of sensing extrovertedly or introvertedly, same for intuition, thinking, and feeling. So what we end up with is each person has all of the 8 functions. It's what makes the difference in our personality type is in what order or which is dominant in our thought processes. So taking a look at that. So here's an example of some types that I put up there. So you can see on the right-hand column, you see INTJs. And the dominant function is NI, which stands for introverted intuition. And the auxiliary is TE, extroverted thinking. So all of this, what it really is trying to say is that all of us have all the functions. It's which order and which is dominant. So for an INTJ, the most dominant one is an intuitive taking in of information from the outside world, and then organizing that information into sort of some systems that says, okay, this has this sort of an implication, as categorizing it and organizing the outside world in sort of a systematic way. Whereas an INTP, who are very often mistyped as either INTJs or INTJs are mistyped as INTPs, actually have very different function orders. And if one looks at this, you can see how much easier to differentiate between the two types. But they're not all that similar when you look at the function orders. So again, without spending too much time, this is sort of basis for helping refine the type that you are and finding a best fit type. Just understanding this also, once you know your type, looking at cognitive functions and processes helps you understand yourself better. I can think of many situations where I've had interactions with other people, especially of an extroverted nature, and I can say, given that interaction, what sort of came out as was an example of their dominant function. So, to give you a simple example, right? I think everybody's seen the show House. Dr. House, if you haven't, holler. But the character of Gregory House, right, is very often typed as INTJ, and this is obviously a caricature, a stereotype of INTJs, but things that sort of that stand out, right, is that he is very often hungry for more information, always asking, and then sort of dismissing or categorizing that information into something that's useful to him or not useful. Obviously, the caricatures there are that has absolutely no respect for other people, or in terms of their feelings and what they think about something. If something is right, it's right, regardless of what other people think. If something is wrong, it's wrong, regardless of what I think. Obviously, this is an extreme caricature. It's not sort of intended to be a good example, but it illustrates the scenario here. So, unless there are questions about this, I'm going to skip ahead. Okay. So, what does this tell me? What does all this mean? So, the whole point of going through and figuring out your type and looking at Jungian profiles versus MBTI is to understand a little bit more about ourselves first. Obviously, this can tell you more about others as well if you know their type or are able to sort of guess at their type. But your natural tendencies and affinities, capacities and blind spots. So when one talks of capacities, and I'm using the term here myself, I'm drawing a distinction between capacity and ability. Capacity you might think of as the inherent, latent potential to be good at something or have it. It may not be developed, it may be developed depending on sort of, this is the environment you grow up in, your education, etc. But very often they have certain capacities to do some things quite well, they are natural to them, and certain blind spots that one has to watch out for. And then obviously certain tendencies and affinities, right? So an affinity that always jumps to my mind that characterizes most introverted intuitive types is a love for fantasy fiction. I'm talking about Lord of the Rings, we're talking about Game of Thrones. It's sort of, somebody who's, into manga or any one of these, and in sort of almost in a cult-like way, you can generally guess that, they're introverted intuitive types, INs. Similarly, you'll have blind spots and capacities. So taking the example of INTJs once again, one of the reasons I'm doing that is there's so many of us in our team who are INTJ. So the typical explanation or example here would be they're idea people. Generally, anything is possible, everything is negotiable, and generally they'll ask, they look at ideas and say, hey, why not? But you can generally also expect a reason of why that not, and find a reason of why not. So if not, they'll go ahead with it. So that's sort of the intuitive or thinking there. And the extroverted here is sort of closure as a payoff for efforts expended. So generally efforts are expended if they see sort of the effort tending towards a larger pattern, goal, or larger outcome. Not always, but at least in terms of thought processes, that's sort of what drives it. Product drives process in a way. So these are typical tendencies. I'm not, saying this is a hard and fast rule. So some stereotypes that we can see from MBTI, fairly common. We've all seen men are from Mars and women are from Venus, right? Actually, a lot of the stereotypes that come from that even in the movies about this strong, silent man or sort of the stubborn, mule-headed, and women as the caretaker actually comes from or can be seen actually in observed from the fact that the largest population of personality type amongst women is of the SFN nature, so that ESFJ, and amongst men is ESTJ. And when you read through the profiles of these two personality types, you'll see that a lot of the stereotypes that are common in pop culture can be found amongst these people. And obviously, given that it's sort of popular culture, there's the stereotype is then caricatured and portrayed in television or movies or whatever. But you can also start to see what the genesis or sort of the fire behind the smoke is. For the rest of us, sort of types which are less represented, there are caricatures for those as well, and I'll come to that. But this should really help us, help us understand why, when we talk about some things and the stereotypes are applied. It's good to keep in mind that not first of all, the stereotypes aren't true for everybody, but they are true for some people, and what one can do to understand them and sort of work with that. So there are plenty of people who are different, but many of people who do conform to that type. So looking at some of the other stereotypes. So this is a caricature of INTJs that's fairly common in pop culture. The INTJ in love, I will solve you. I can relate to this fairly often. Getting lost in solving something without sometimes paying attention to maybe other factors. Raj, do you relate?
Hey, Aditya, absolutely. So yeah, I've been watching House every day, and I think he's like my absolute hero. So
yeah, I know. I don't know how many INTJs, but all of us. I think House is a hero for every one of us.
I'm like, why didn't I become a doctor? So
yeah,
that's where I'm starting my whole sort of regret in life is. Thanks to Dr. House. So,
yeah. And so some of the other fictional INTJs, obviously, disclaimer once again, the criminal mastermind comes to mind fairly often. Dr. Otto Octavius, Hannibal Lecter, Professor Moriarty, they're all examples of INTJs in pop culture. You also have the opposite. You have people like Mr. Darcy. Darcy is actually a very, very good example of an INTJ, a little more realistic example actually, both in terms of their romantic incapacities and inability to deal with people all that well, and also the other characteristics. Mr. Burns from Simpsons, a really good caricature. Lex Luthor. I think, as you can see, a lot of the great villains in pop culture are typed as INTJs. I'm not saying I'm a villain. You also have Vito Corleone and Michael Corleone, Clarice Starling, Silence of the Lambs. So, if nothing else, INTJs are fairly interesting characters. And not to say that there aren't great characters from other types, just given how many INTJs we know in our group. I have one more slide after this, but not too many. Since I thought we'll spend the rest of the time sort of opening up and seeing if people have either questions or want to talk about it. But one exercise I thought would be fun would I think all of us watch Big Bang Theory to some extent. Maybe we'd sort of like to take a swipe at guessing at the various personality traits amongst some of these guys, and maybe trying to guess at their functional types. So maybe we can, everybody can go off mute and try that. But at the moment, I mean, first, if we have questions or comments, anything, please let's get into that. Okay. None. Cool.
No, I don't think anything.
All right, cool. So maybe I'll start with Sheldon. People want to guess, is Sheldon extroverted or introverted?
Introverted, I think.
Introverted? Cool. I think we probably agree on that one. I think Vinu's going to find this interesting, but is he intuitive or sensing? What would you guess?
Neither question.
I think, I mean, if I had to hazard a guess, I'd say intuitive. And since you said interesting, right? So it almost sounds like that's wrong.
No, actually, intuitive. I mean, at least the consensus is that he is intuitive.
Okay.
I think thinking or feeling, that's almost an obvious one, but I'll let people give their thoughts. I think Sheldon is, I mean, very, very, stereotyped as thinking, right?
Yeah.
I mean, his capacity to think about other people is sort of hobbled by his need to be right.
INTJ.
Actually, funnily enough, you know what consensus is? He's INTP. That's the interesting part. So, the joke goes, right? Sheldon is one lab experiment away from being a supervillain. So, so Sheldon's INTP. Let's look at the. I think I've asked this.
I was to take a guess. I'd say Penny would be ESFJ.
Very close, RV. I think the consensus is ESFP.
Okay.
The PJ function is very hard to tell on a fictional character. So yeah, I mean ESFP, ESFJ, very, very close. Absolutely right on the stereotype there.
And Leonard, ISFP or ISFJ?
Yep, that's really good. Any other guesses, folks? How about Wolowitz?
Wolowitz is an E for sure. And beyond that,
ENT for sure, I think. ENTJ?
I actually I forget what it is. I'll look up my cheat sheet, but my guess is actually slightly different for Wolowitz. My guess is was initially an introvert, not an extrovert. And I'll sort of discuss that, but the consensus is he is ESTP.
ESTP. Really? Interesting.
Yeah, I don't agree with that one as much. First, the reason I think he's an introvert, but so this is the great example to discuss, right? Introverts, I mean, he comes across as being extroverted because he's always sort of pulling Raj's leg and sort of has all these wisecracks all the time, and he's extremely, comes across as talkative and very outgoing in a sense. But it's all within the environment of his group, and that's very true of many introverts, that they can be talkative, outgoing, comfortable within a group they're familiar with, but outside of their group they can be sort of not shy but reticent, and sort of not be open to easily sort of doing something, except if it's in a very sort of stunted way. Obviously, this is a caricature, right? So a lot of the characteristics of Wolowitz do conform to that. He's sort of the outgoing one within the group, but outside of the group, he's as much of a dork. And on the his success or failure with women, right, is a bit because he's a nerd, but also because the inability to go out and just sort of interact with people in general. The other thing of the ST part, right, is one of the stereotypes of ISTPs is their or STs in general is that they can be very, very good at practical things, building stuff, being able to sort of break things down, rebuild them, sort of in engineering terms, very mechanically or electrically. She's sort of a mechanical engineer, right? I think, or electrical engineer, one of the two, and that sort of fits the ST stereotype very well. So that's the ESTP, STP part. So the PJ, very hard to tell. I wouldn't venture a guess, but mine would have been ISTP versus ESTP. I don't know if that made sense to you guys.
Little bit. To me, it definitely felt more extroverted to me. Again, you're right. It's hard to tell, right? Because
Right.
You don't really see all the interactions. Felt more extroverted to me. It felt that his inability to interact at certain levels socially felt
Right.
more related to some extent, the feeling versus thinking aspect of it, and unable to relate to what some of the other people he's interacting with were feeling,
Right.
and being able to respond to those feelings, due to which there's always social awkwardness.
Right.
That's kind of what stood out a little more.
Right. That's true. So, so yeah, the consensus is ESTP on Wolowitz. What are the other characters? Raj. Any guesses for Raj?
Introvert for sure, but I think
Yeah.
maybe INFP.
Bang on, Vinu. That's exactly what the general consensus on Raj is. So again, I mean, keeping in mind that this is for a TV show, but a lot of the characteristics that he matches up.
Why not ISFP?
A little bit of the again, this is going by stereotypes, right? That whole thing about fantasy and cult love for things and being able to live in a world of their own versus sort of the world in the here and now. Sort of, I think the difference between S and N's is subtle enough that A, it's hard to tell from a TV character, but B, one has to sort of apply stereotypes where possible here. So S's are generally more in the here and now, practical on immediate things, not in overall grand scheme of things practical. I mean, all of these guys are scientists, right? So it doesn't mean that they don't understand rationality or anything like that. But it's more sort of immediate and practical concerns versus being able to live in your own world of ideas or things like that, or fantasy world almost. That's INFP. Now the outright caricatures that stand out is, and these characters don't show up as often, but Mrs. Cooper, that is Sheldon's mom, is a stereotype for ESFJ, completely and totally. So this is sort of the caretaker mom who sort of, who indulges in Sheldon's peculiarity, but also sort of disciplines him and sort of very practical and helpful. That's one stereotype. The other one is, let's see what the other one is. there aren't too many of the ISTJs or ESTJs in the show that one can stand out. Yeah, so it's one of the fun things about doing this with fictional characters is that, especially the ones that are well written about, it's fun to just sort of speculate, and then it helps discuss the functions and what function works where. One of the interesting ones in the slides that I'll shift to is FE, and that sort of easily stands out. So FE generally is, what they say is extroverted feeling. What that really means is that people who are very quickly aware of others and people around them and how things affect them, whether they act on it or not, but it's sort of, they make calls based on very often, but the group dynamic as much as their other principles that are involved, they make, they're able to respond to and see. So example for that, a very person who leads with that is an ENFJ, but there are other examples of FEs as well, where they have externally facing, you could describe it as empathy, externally facing empathy. So ESTP also are like that. Clearly, that's one of the reasons I didn't type Wolowitz, but again, fictional character as an ESTP.
Yeah, on the intuition versus sensing one, right? It's interesting because often the way I tend to think about it is where people who rely more on intuition try to connect those dots on their own versus sort of actively taking in all the information that currently there is. And maybe I'm not sure if this is a good way to think about it, but I tend to think of people who are good listeners as often being more sensing a little more, because here and now they're sort of listening and really taking in a lot more information versus trying to jump ahead with intuition necessarily.
So actually, RV, you're right on the one part of it, that generally the intuitive types are the ones sort of try and connect the dots, and if the dots are missing, sort of draw a line between the dots, or sort of extrapolate or interpolate where necessary. That's totally true. That's a really good way of describing it. On the listening part, right? Being a good listener is actually not just driven by how you just take in information. Being a good listener is also driven by your other functions. So someone who in a sense values what that other person is saying, right? Regardless of whether they're intuitive or sensing, will pay attention to that person. So and so, for example, this is a complaint of INTJs, right? They can be oblivious of a lot of their surroundings and not sort of pay attention to something unless they care about it for some particular reason, right? So I'll take me in cars, right? I can very often I can ignore what's going on in the car and sort of what the situation is, like it's dirty or it needs some attention. I can ignore it for a while and be quite comfortable with that. But there will be a certain time where I'll sort of, where I think it's important, and then I mean, the amount of attention that I can give it is just I can spend hours just paying attention to it, looking at every little thing. That's because of the need to pay attention to it, and then taking in everything, and sort of even if the dots are missing, I can extrapolate and figure out. I think Raj does this as well, being able to guess what's wrong with the car, if it's misbehaving or something like that. It's a question of whether you're focusing or paying attention on it or not. But I'm not continuously doing it. I think that's the difference, whereas a sensor would continuously be doing it. Oh shoot, RV got dropped. Vinu? RV's wondering if you have admin control. Anyways, going further, so I'll just show you guys this deck and see if we can have any more conversations. I'm not sure if you got the last part of what I was saying, but I don't know if you're on. Yeah, anyway, so this is the chart for the Big Bang Theory. Yeah, so one of the things I didn't talk about, and I think it's sort of pretty handy, is there are lots of ideas about how, if you understand certain tendencies or, preferences amongst a certain personality type, it also helps in identify better ways of interaction and, working together. There are certain thumb rules that one can look at, but I think they only become useful once everybody sort of got a better idea of the best fit type, and they spent some time looking at their own type and looking through the information and seeing. It takes a little bit of a while to collect good profiles about yourself and better understanding. Generally, you can either relate really well, but some things might be off about the description. One, because your own nurture and environment growing up, and also it's because obviously there's no perfect description of any type, right? So, but yeah, I would say apart from the test that one has done, one should try and figure out your type based on cognitive functions and then see what else it reveals. It's a very interesting exercise, personally. One of the things I guess I would caution in this is not to worry about the PJ as much, because that's the PJ sort of force fit from Myers Briggs onto the fundamental theories of Jung's theories, and the other sort of focusing on the sensing and intuition versus thinking feeling, and then understanding which function is dominant in your personality helps more than figuring out J versus P. So yeah, that's all I had.
Hey, thanks, Aditya. Awesome.
My pleasure.
Sorry, I dropped off. Are we done? Are we through Q&A?
Yeah, I think you dropped partway through our discussion on the listening thing. Don't know how much you caught of that, but yeah, there weren't any other questions after that.
Okay. Hey, cool, awesome, Aditya. Thanks for the recap and running us through this. And the next knot is knot 7, so we have to come up with something interesting.
By the way, James Bond is very often an ESTP.
Interesting. ESTP. Oh, this is the list. Okay. And you know some of these characters. Alex, Levitum. Clearly, I don't watch Big Bang Theory enough. Hey, cool guys. I'm going to drop off and get some other stuff done. So, I'll catch up with you guys in a bit.
Catch you
Thanks,
later.
Aditya.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Aditya.